As it became known, the Israeli Air Force is using F-35 aircrafts in combat operations in the north, particularly on the Lebanese-Israeli border. The F-35 is a fifth-generation aircraft, and this is not the first experience of its combat use. By the way, the Israeli Air Force was the first to use the F-35 in real combat operations. Now their use is becoming more and more widespread. I'm going to tell you what this machine is and why it's a fifth-generation aircraft. What are its very interesting features? Hello, everyone. My name is Sergey Auslender. You are on my channel. You can support this video by simply liking it or commenting. Subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications because videos are released every day and most often twice a day. You can also make a one-time donation to the channel. This all helps the stable and constant operation of the channel. To do this, there's a super thank you button for one-time donations. Links to them are in the description. In general, work on the creation of fifth-generation aircraft, even on the creation of the appearance of a fifth-generation aircraft, began in the 1970s in the United States and the Soviet Union, respectively. By the end of the first quarters of the 21st century, there are several serial samples and there are several models, the fifth generation of which I would say raises some doubts. Well, in fact, superiority in this business belongs to the United States. They were the first in the world to create the F-22 Raptor aircraft, if you remember. He's still in service, he's flying, he's fine, but its program was closed. The U.S. Air Force received 187 aircraft, including prototypes. This aircraft flies. This aircraft also took part in combat operations, but since it turned out to be terribly expensive, that's when it went into production. It was a saying canopy of gold, found its own, as it were, its real embodiment, because it weighed 19 tons. And at that point, its cost was as high as 19 tons of gold. That's what the plane ended up costly. That's why they closed the program. The planes themselves are flying. They're all right. At the same time, the United States was developing the fifth generation F-35 aircraft. Now I will go on. Aside from the States, it's believed that Russians and Chinese have fifth generation planes, respectively, Su-57 Russian and J-20 Chinese. Besides this, the Chinese are working on J-31, another one version. The Russians are developing Su-75, and the Japanese are working on creating a fifth-generation aircraft. Even South Korea was trying to develop something like a light aircraft. I'll say right away that Su-57 is not an aircraft of the fifth generation. It purely seems like a myth because it doesn't have a fifth-generation engine. They never managed to get it right. That's why a fifth-generation plane is flying on a fourth-generation engine, and if a Zhiguli engine is put into a Tesla, it will still be a Tesla. It may be that they'll complete it, but in the conditions of sanctions, this seems unlikely. They have a breakdown and desynchronization. Perhaps they won't manage it, especially the Chinese planes. According to many experts, there are also questions specifically about the engines. Two aircraft prototypes were presented for testing, the X-32 and the X-35, the former from Boeing. The latter from Lockheed Martin. After preliminary tests, usually it goes like this for them. Not that companies just create some prototypes out of the blue. No, they form a technical task, provide funds. The Pentagon allocates money to the companies, both companies, for the production of prototypes. They make prototypes, check them out, choose from them. And then one drops out of the race, one remains. So Lockheed Martin Company was left in the game, and its prototype X-35 was deemed indeed prospective, and this development started. This story didn't progress very rapidly because the task was one of immense technical complexity. In general, it needs to be noted that the Americans managed to accomplish an almost unachievable task to create an aircraft in three configurations. One aircraft, but in three different settings. A traditional fighter bomber with regular takeoff from normal airfields, a shortened takeoff and landing for use on aircraft carriers. That is for the Navy. And vertical takeoff and landing for use in the Marine Corps, for use from poorly prepared airfields, and for use from landing ships such as the Tarawa class, OSP, these classes. In the end, they succeeded. What's more, they managed to create three different modifications of the same machine using the same engine. I don't want to delve too deeply into the different ones out there. The technical specifics might not grab your interest, but there are a few unique characteristics I want to touch on. There are unusual and fascinating things about this aircraft structure. They used stealth technology, of course. The crux of the stealth design is minimizing edges and corners. Weapons aren't attached to the wings or under the fuselage. A special radar-absorbing coating is used. Additional elements like hidden weaponry are also used. Creating aircraft like this puts certain responsibilities on and presents certain challenges to the developers. Nevertheless, they've successfully dealt with these challenges. Today, the F-35 is considered the stealthiest aircraft around the world. Its effective radar cross-section, or the way it appears on radar, is smaller than a large bird, say a kite. It shows up on radar less than an F-35, a testament to its successful design. They used the same engine there. The Americans developed it. It's the engine that was used in the F-22. It is the fifth generation engine of Pratt & Whitney F-135 company, but they managed to design it in a typical engine configuration. I mean, a longitudinal takeoff with a run, and to create its modification for vertical takeoff. Again, I repeat, developers ran into utterly colossal difficulties, yes, which had to be removed. During the course of development, then during military tests, there was a separate story with tests. On aircraft carriers, for example, because the so-called stick, it's such a stick width. A hook which the aircraft hooks onto the cable of the aerofinisher, it had to be made retractable into the body because of, which there arose requirements for its length. It turned out to be shorter. This requires higher pilot qualification for landing on an aircraft carrier. In general, there were a lot of difficulties. The hassle was absolutely ridiculous, but so the Americans handled all this and ended up with the F-35 in 3 variants. Again, standard takeoff and landing, carrier-based takeoff and landing, and vertical takeoff and landing, or even shortened. There's the possibility of shortened takeoff and landing because this engine has a deflected thrust vector. Put simply, it stands in such a position, the aircraft takes off, returns to normal position, and flies. Well, that's a rather simplified explanation, but during the development of the 5th generation aircraft concept in the Soviet Union, it was thought that the main thing was super maneuverability. It should be able to perform absolutely unthinkable aerobatic maneuvers. The Americans thought that the main thing wasn't super maneuverability, but rather its combat dynamism, and above all, its data processing. That's what American developers focused on. In modern warfare, the likelihood of an air battle, what's commonly known as a dogfight, where aircraft spin around each other, is literally shrinking to zero. Now the main thing is long-range missile combat. Who saw first? Who launched a missile first? That's the concept the F-35 was developed around. As for its armament, there's not much to say, because this is a standard set of all NATO aviation ammunition, literally. Missiles for short and long-distance combat, guided air bombs, all kinds of smart ammunition capable of striking with great heights, targets there with a circular probable deviation of 3 to 5m. Now, under a separate program, Norway and Australia are funding the development of so-called unified anti-ship missile. It is called a naval strike missile. That is a promising anti-ship missile, which will be a universal thing for all NATO countries or near NATO countries. Its development continues, but they have already moved on to its testing. That is, in principle, the F-35 is capable, having a complete range of weapons, to strike any target in the air, on the ground, on water, and even underground, depending on the application. Concerning bunker busters, they also adapted it for the use of tactical nuclear weapons. These are nuclear bombs. There were certain works have been carried out related to the installation, or rather the possibility of installing these bombs inside this weapons compartment and so on. But this is more as if no one, because so far in any case they are not going to use nuclear weapons. The aircraft has been adapted for this, but so far it is intended for completely different tasks. The F-35, oddly enough, also has cannon armament. It would seem, why would a 5th generation aircraft need a cannon, but the designers are not yet ready to give up such an option. This is a modification of the same cannon that General Dynamic is developing, or rather developed it and is engaged in its manufacture. This gun was originally intended for the Harrier vertical takeoff fighters, but it was slightly modified. The number of barrels was reduced from 5 to 4. The ammunition load was slightly reduced, all of that. This gun is designed to be integrated into the design of the aircraft in such a way that it is not possible to reduce it, or rather not to increase its visibility. Let's say there is a gun, 180 shells of ammunition, and the so-called suspended cannon container has also been developed for it. This is when the container is suspended. There's a cannon inside, but that's just an option. Well, I'm even honest speaking. I don't know what tasks it is for, but since the designers bothered with this, it means for something. As for the onboard equipment, this is interesting, and I won't go into it either. They're in the all vote. It's quite an interesting development. It's 6 infrared sensors that are located throughout the fuselage of the aircraft, providing an overview of the yes, not 360 degrees, but 360 degrees in all directions. This system allows the aircraft, not the pilot, mind you, the aircraft itself, I'll explain more later, to detect a broad range of targets in the infrared spectrum, surface, ground, and air targets. For instance, it can spot ballistic missile launches from 1,300 kilometers away, which provides a significant edge in striking missiles preemptively, because this aircraft, I repeat, is one of the flying command posts, but more on that later, because now I want to talk about the pilot's helmet. And one of the achievements of the people who designed it is this pilot's helmet. This helmet is manufactured by the Israeli company Elbit. It's a system known as HMDC, a helmet-mounted display system. It's not just a helmet that's placed on someone's head or even a pilot's helmet. Oh no, it is a flying command post among other things, but I'll get into that a bit later because now I'm going to discuss his helmet. Yes, one of the accomplishments the designers are proud of is this pilot's helmet. This helmet is produced by the Israeli firm Elbit, and it's a system known as HMDC, which is short for Helmet-Mounted Display System. It's not just a simple helmet that one puts on a person's head or even a pilot's helmet. No, indeed, the computer is peculiarly configured, actually, with a bunch of wires behind it that are connected to the apparatus and sort of bring to mind the Matrix movie, where individuals had wires injected into their heads through a specific hole. This allows the pilot to see through the cockpit, which is the main purpose of this setup. Each helmet is tailored specifically for the pilot. It scans the pilot's head. That's essentially how it functions. Then they're produced on 3D printers. They print the helmet's inner part so that it fits precisely on each specific pilot's head. This is done to calibrate and synchronize incoming data very accurately and to ensure it doesn't rotate or slip on the head. All the information that comes into the plane, this plane is a kind of flying point for collecting information, and it produces it itself with the help of its radar station, red sensors there, and various other systems. It has a lot of them. It processes it and distributes it either between units or EE shares it with the command post and so on. All this happens virtually without the participation of pilots. This is the main difference between the F-35 and its conventional counterparts. The fast processing of gigantic arrays of information. If you find yourself inside the cockpit of the F-35, you will not see a lot of these different screens and sensors as it was in aircraft even of the 4th generation. There are 2 large touch screens, 50 by 20 centimeters, in which all the information is displayed. All the information is projected into a kind of inside the pilot's helmet. There is a special sight like this. Yes, it's kind of like in 3D and 3D glasses. I don't know how to say it correctly, but here he is in them, and he sees all this in parallel with this. He sees the situation outside the plane. That is, he turns his head on his EE display. A view is projected like this. From these cameras, yes, which are located at this angle, if he looks naturally at his feet, then he sees what is happening under the plane. This is what he managed to create. In addition, the F-35, this network of centric warfare, which is already being talked about a lot when all units share data with each other. Yes, and one of the units of the F-35 in this case is able to process this information. It is able to point other aircraft at the CE. He is able to transmit some information to the command post or to the headquarters. He is able to receive information from units from others. For this, he has special equipment that allows him to process this information at a gigantic speed in gigantic quantities. Pilots who fly the F-35, in particular, this is Tony Wilson. He served 25 years in the Navy. He's a naval aviator, elite of the elite. He flew a variety of aircraft types, after which he moved to Lockheed Martin as a test pilot. Well, this is supposed to be the top of the career for pilots. The last thing he flew was the F-16 with the latest modifications. Then he switched to the F-35. And he says the following: when we switched to 4th generation fighters like the F-16, we went from pilots to sensor managers. Yeah, because the F-16 has a lot of different sensors. Now, thanks to the F-35, the integration of sensors, displaying all the sensors on a single screen, and the processing system allows us to take some of the responsibility for controlling the sensors away from the pilot, which allows us to be true tacticians. Now, the pilot doesn't have to fly the plane at the same time because it's a single-seater, yeah, and process the information. Actually, the F-35 is essentially a flying computer that takes a significant amount of the pilot's workload. It uses artificial intelligence to independently make decisions about transmitting and processing information and attacking targets. If it detects something like a missile launch, it notifies the command post and may even launch an anti-missile towards the target. Pilots who fly the F-35 say that it's surprisingly easy to fly despite it being a very complex and expensive fifth-generation aircraft. It's much easier for them to operate than the F. Actually, the first foreign customers to get these planes were the Israeli Air Force, who were also the first to use them in real combat scenarios. The first evidence of combat use dates back to 2018, when those same Liechtenstein Air Force, who I love to discuss, used it against targets in Syria. Since then, Americans have used it too, mostly in the Middle East, and Israel regularly uses it, including during the current war. But as it was discovered, the F-35 was subsequently used for reconnaissance missions, particularly over Lebanon. One of the former Air Force commanders said at a conference that it was quite a sensation that we used the F-35 for reconnaissance. Missions in Lebanon, due to the plane's highly complex, sensitive, and all-seeing equipment, is used, among other things, for reconnaissance. I mean, its versatility is the main task for the designers, who have been able to create an aircraft fitted for many missions in 3 other roles. There is experience in air interceptions. Specifically, the Israeli Air Force used it for drone interceptions, infiltrating into Israeli airspace and intercepting cruise and ballistic missiles used by the Houthis to attack our southern borders, our southernmost city, Eilat. In this sense, the experience of its combat use is considered quite positive. Obviously, I can't avoid talking about the drawbacks. If I do, all sorts of patriots will get offended in the comments. I'll get to the cost a bit later, which overall could probably be considered one of the disadvantages. The aircraft is really quite expensive, but no one's ever seen a cheap fifth-generation aircraft and likely never will. One of the main downsides of the F-35 is its reliance on software. It is this very software, the one that's required continuous updating, that's been patched dozens of times. Yes, it constantly needs to be upgraded and improved, which increases expenses and makes it highly dependent on this software. It's like a flying computer that constantly needs software improvements. That's pretty much it. But keep in mind, most of this data is from the late 1990s, and most of these issues have since been resolved. And this aircraft is acknowledged not just as viable, relatively speaking, but also as promising, yes, because it was created at a time with an open architecture, so to speak, for modernization and modification, so that more and more new software could be pinned to it. Only problem is to create it the software. To increase its capabilities and extend its functions, well, probably among its disadvantages, one could consider a relatively small combat radius that's currently being developed, but it's in the range of 1,000 kilometers, slightly more for aircraft with conventional takeoff and landing that are based on ground airfields, and a bit less for aircraft that are based on airfields, and even less, about 850, for those that are ship-based but employ vertical takeoff and landing. This could easily be attributed to its disadvantages. However, it's believed that 1,000 kilometers is by no means a normal, such a confident combat radius when working from, say, aircraft carriers, yes, which can move along with the planes. But there are discussions about this in the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, not, by the way, with the help of external fuel tanks. They can be enlarged, yes, reduce stealth. But it is believed that before entering the area of potential detection, it can fly on the external fuel tanks, then dump them, and thus the radius increases. But in general, it is considered a disadvantage of the F. To date, Martin has produced about 1,000 of these aircraft, and it is already approaching 1,000. This number is exploited, if I'm not mistaken, in 9 countries of the world, and about 10 countries have already signed an agreement with Lockheed Martin on the supply of these aircraft. Well, that is, they are signed with the US Department of Defense. It is clear that Lockheed Martin fulfills these orders, and there is a great deal of interest in these aircraft. Of the latter, these are the Czech Republic and Greece. Here, Greece has approved plans for the purchase there. The F-35s are worth about $7 billion, and the Czech Republic wants to buy them too. They are buying them literally by the dozens. Scandinavian countries are also switching to the F-35, which has allowed them to provide their F-16S to Ukraine. Ukrainian pilots are undergoing retraining, well, I should say separately, of course, about the cost. It is believed that the F-30 development program, R5, cost about $56 billion. Although at the time Trump came to the power, he began to claim that it was worth $400 billion. But Trump's words should be to be a little skeptical. There is a question of how to count. In fact, the plane really turned out to be not cheap. The plane turned out to be quite expensive, I would say, very expensive, to the point that the states are financially even. This project was not fully completed. Other customers joined it, which were also partially financed, and some of the production facilities were localized abroad, in Italy in particular, a factory for producing the F-35 fighter jet. There aren't any European versions yet, but Israel, for instance, gets partially equipped F-35S from the US. We're the only country in the world that the Americans allow to modify their equipment. They gave us permission to install Israeli systems here, like weapons control and armaments and so on. By the way, it turned out to be pretty expensive, strangely enough. The development, well, there's nothing strange about it, really. It's a flying computer. And developing the software, again, it's a flying computer. It's not just wires and nuts and bolts. It's very complex programs that make this kind of development possible. The plane is really expensive. We're talking tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars spent on development. And Russian propagandists love to talk about it like it's a golden plane, a golden plane. It might well be golden, but the whole point is that it has been produced, it flies, and Lockheed Martin makes a profit by selling this plane to foreign customers. It's sold already around 1,000 units. No one even knows how much the Russian Su-57 costs. It's a secret behind 7 seals, how much they've spent on. The development is a different story. If you're interested, you can watch this video about the Su-75. This is a real scam, as though they developed a 5th generation aircraft, a lightweight version, single engine, but they are actively seeking clients, or rather, they want to collect money from these clients to complete the development and then sell it back to the customers. Like, give us the money now and we will build you something like that. Here you are. So this is an important point, that this plane of the 5th generations, even the United States, did not have the money to develop it alone. They attracted it. There is a whole consortium of different countries. There is even a gradation. And there are participants in this project, first category, second stage, third stage, and so on. But nevertheless, the plane is ready. The plane is flying. The plane is taking part in hostilities. The aircraft is being produced in large batches, according to reviews pilots, including, by the way, from Israel. It also fully meets the requirements of a 5th generation aircraft, as well as the requirements of individual countries and individual theaters. In the field of military operations, it greatly expands the capabilities of the Army or Air Force in which it is. In short, everything is fine with him with this plane, and the fact that he is expensive, well, so listen, people go out for their own money. They have the right. Thank you for watching my videos. Don't forget to support them. I urge you again, like, subscribe, comment. In general, these are quite simple actions. It helps a lot to promote them. Thanks again. Bye-bye, everyone.